New Strategy, Policy and Communications Director, and that includes the Tame team as well. And currently busy working, as you might have guessed, with Lucy Jakes and Tim Foster on the Strategic Transport Plan. So really pleased to join today. Thanks for having me along.
Chair, I think we're now good, and we are now webcasting.
Okay, then let's start. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of Transport for the North Scrutiny Committee. It's a consultation call today. It is also broadcast live, and I would just remind members of that. A consultation call means that if there were any decisions to make today, they would have to be further ratified by the Chief Executive, who happens to be on the call as well. So I'm hoping he will commit to whatever comments that are made today, that he will ensure that he and his colleagues will actually take note and investigate whether they can be usefully added to any future board papers. So thank you very much for that. So I'd like to welcome everybody here. And I would like to just ask Gary if we've got any apologies at all.
Yes, we've had apologies from Councillor Hughes and Councillor Southard.
Thank you very much. The meeting today is going to be very helpful, I believe, with Martin Tugwell and Paul Kelly doing a very good introduction to where we now are as far as budget and the business plan for TfN is concerned. In particular, that is particularly helpful, I think, because there has been what I would call a slight void in knowing exactly how we can best, that's TfN, how TfN can best contribute to transport in the north. So I'm very much looking forward to that. I intend the meeting to finish no later than 12:45 today, so hopefully that fits with all your timings. So I would now ask, are there any declarations of interest at all? Okay, I'll take that as no. So minutes, are there any questions arising from the minutes of the previous meeting at all? No, so we take those as read. Thank you very much. So I'll now hand over to Martin Tugwell and Paul Kelly, who are going to tell us all about the business plan and the budget for TfN.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll kick this one off. You've got in the pack of papers circulated before the meeting a short slide deck, which I'll kind of just touch on a few key points in that. I won't go in great detail through every slide, but I hope it tells a story that we're working with at the moment. So in terms of where we start from, members will know and that we're obviously a statutory body. We've got some general functions, which we've just reminded everybody of in the pack there. And the point I'd make here is, as we move forward with the strategic transport plan, and we'll hear from colleagues later on this agenda about where we are with that and the approach to consultation, there are, I think what we'll be looking for over the course of the summer and into the autumn is looking at how we can develop our proposals around implementing that. And in the past, we've talked a little bit about the importance of having regional indicative funding allocations. And I think as we look to finalise the strategic transport plan, this ability of TfN to make advice about how we can improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of delivery will be something that we'll want to come back to. It's just really kind of at this stage just to kind of put that on your radar, because it will be an area of work that we'll want to take forward in the summer and into the autumn. Members will have seen that we've highlighted where we are in terms of the funding allocation. I'm delighted to say that we had confirmation of the funding for 2 years, which is the remainder of the spending review, and the kind of the highlights in the funding allocations was set out in the slide deck on page 13. A couple of things there to talk about. I think it's worth just acknowledging that in the funding letter we received from the Secretary of State, there was a recognition of the work that we had done over the last 12 months in terms of reshaping and refocusing TFN. And I think it's nice to see that being recognised in the funding letter from the department and from the Secretary of State. You'll see that we've got some funding there identified, particularly around what is called a Centre of Excellence. I think this, for me, is an example of how we are continuing to build the reputation demonstrably of what TFN is about. And when you see in the slide deck about how some of the areas where the department is looking for us to do some work, things like the Common Analytical Framework, the EVCI, the EV charging infrastructure tool, is actually how we can then help share some of our experience and tools with our colleagues and other STBs. And I think that comes back to the role that TFN is increasingly playing as a bit of a strategic thought leader. When we haven't yet had final confirmation around the NPR TAME funding, but there are ongoing conversations with the department, and based upon the conversations that Paul and myself have had, we don't anticipate there being any issue there. It's a matter of timing rather than anything there to flag to this committee. The other thing I would just say about the funding allocation, when we take the budget to the board in later this month, we will be setting it in the context of a 3-year funding envelope. We've obviously got clarity around the next 2 years, which takes us to the end of the spending review. We will need to put into the paper before the board our assumptions about funding for year 3, and they will be assumptions. But in effect, it provides the context and the foundation then for us to make a subsequent submission to what will be the next spending review, which could come as early as next summer or early autumn, depending on events nationally. So I think what I would say to this committee is we've got clarity for the next 2 years. We're going to have to make some assumptions about funding available in year 3, but that will in effect be the basis on which we then make our case to a future spending review on the way forward. You'll see in the slide deck, we've talked about the core strategic narrative and the model that we put in place last year. None of that has changed from last year. It's an evolution. We completed the reshaping of TFN last year, and we've put in place that new operating model. And so I think it gives us an opportunity to look forward now into the future as we plan for the next for this year, for the year ahead. The guiding principles on page 16 of the slide of the paper pack, again, are very much consistent with what we've said in the past. And then what you've got is at the end of this slide deck, you've got the approach that we've taken to date, and you've got the key areas of activity being identified. Just to say, in terms of the Centre of Excellence, there are a number of conversations going on at the moment. We need to work through what our offer would be to our partners, both nationally and within the region. And we know there is interest in the support that we can provide to our partners. But we need to work through, as part of the detail business planning, what that will actually look like. And indeed, we need to work with our colleagues and other STBs to make sure that we have clarity on the offer that we can give to them. I think the issue for me is we need to move forward with that, but we also need to do it in a way that makes sense, and we need to recognise it will take time to develop some of these offers. So it'll be an area of activity that evolves over the course of the year, rather than, if you like, starting from day one of the new financial year. In terms of the priorities and deliverables, Chair, I think they're relatively straightforward in terms of what we're saying there. It'd be interesting to see if members of the committee have any particular observations or comments. Undoubtedly, the strategic transport plan has got to be our primary focus this year because it is our raison d'etre. You've also got increasingly key roles around the integrated rail plan, particularly around things like the Transpennine route upgrade. We're seeing the blockades now. We're seeing the investment coming on stream. So our role in terms of the stakeholder forums and the engagement in the programme board is going to be really important. And the other thing I would say is around national highways. We've got a road investment strategy period coming up. We're a little bit dependent upon when some of these documents are going to be published, but undoubtedly it will be a key area for us to be focusing on, because making the case for investment in the north is at the heart of what we're about. The only other thing I would kind of draw attention to within the priorities and deliverables is earlier this year we heard the Secretary of State for Transport set out his ambition for the new Great British Railways. We've long talked about the importance of, in the north, building on the existing devolution we have through the Rail North Partnership. And what we've flagged up in the priorities and deliverables is getting that detail of what the northern proposition will look like moving forward, because I think if we can be on the front foot, we would hope to be able to kind of maybe put ourselves forward as an area where we can pilot some of the initiatives that people would like to see in terms of rail reform. And that's kind of an area where we'll need to be giving some real attention to provide an offer. But Chair, I think at this stage, that's kind of what I would like to kind of say by way of introduction. Unless, Paul, anything that you want to add at this stage, I suggest we kind of look for comments and reflections from the committee.
Nothing to add.
Thank you very much, Martin and Paul. I can now open this up to questions. So I already have one question, which I believe is Councillor Jones. Welcome, Councillor Jones. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Chair. You mentioned early on in the presentation about a centre for excellence and the budget relating to that. Could you just say a bit more about that, please?
Yeah, by all means. You'll see in the slide pack, we've the funding letter, in addition to identifying what we call core funding, identified an additional 700,000 for each of the next 2 years to cover development of an offer around what is being called as a centre of excellence. I have to say, I'm always been really clear that what we do as TfN is very much in the keeping of being a centre of excellence. We have very good quality data, evidence-led, very clear policy development and the strategy that flows from that. So this, for me, is an evolution, if you like, of our role rather than a new role. What it's good to see, though, is there's some additional funding over the next 2 years to help us develop that role. So I think it's a bit of a commitment, if you like, on the part of the government, and saying, you know, we're on the right direction. The tools we develop are useful. I think the point I'd make to the committee here is what it is illustrating is when we get to the third year of our 3-year financial planning, we're going to have to make some assumptions about the level of funding, because once you start getting into delivering these kind of activities, we need to be able to plan with some certainty in the longer term. So that's why, as I said, when it comes to year 3, we'll need to set out a planning assumptions and then need to have a conversation with government for year 3 as part of a future spending review. Paul, is there anything in particular you wanted to pick up on the Centre of Excellence and how we're proposing to handle the fundings?
Probably the most interesting thing is that there was lots of discussions at the back end of last year as to the extent and size of what it could be, and the department asked us for various ideas, you know, and it ranged from sort of 400,000 or 500,000 up to 2 million plus, and you know, the department weighed up all that and decided actually that the number of around about 700,000 was probably what was right for it. And I think that's pitched it, I think, at about the right level, because I think from our perspective, what we endeavour to treat it as is not a standalone entity. It's more a case of just doing more of what we normally do, and making it more widely available to our partners, whether they be local transport authorities or STBs. So it's almost it's an extension of BAU from our perspective, because it can't be anything else. It's not big enough to stand alone, and it's it's substantial and therefore warrants reference. And we've tagged it as a centre of excellence. But interestingly, I just scanned the letter from the Secretary of State, and actually it just talks about certain priorities. It doesn't articulate it as a standalone entity, just saying, can you please focus on the priorities that are identified in the paper.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Fenton, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on the slide talking about GBR transition, and I was wanting to, if you could briefly explain a bit more about the Northern proposition that TFN's putting together, and also whether you have any new intelligence about when a decision is likely to be made about the headquarters for the new organisation. Thank you.
Well, Councillor Fenton and Chair, I unfortunately I have no insight as to when the announcement on the headquarters would be, but I've heard the Secretary of State talk about the importance of announcing that soon. We'll wait to see exactly when that is. But I think the thing about the Northern proposition, we have already across the North, we have a degree of devolution through the Rail North Agreement, through the working of the Rail North Partnership. That gives us a role alongside the DFT in overseeing the implementation and delivery of Northern and TransPennine. So we have a degree of devolution already. And indeed, what we have within that agreement is the ability to establish, if you like, sub-regional business units. And we're certainly at the moment looking to work with colleagues in the Northwest around Liverpool and Manchester and surrounding areas about that, such a proposition. In terms of moving forward, then there are activities we've identified as the Rail North Partnership around things like taking greater account of revenue as well as costs when you come to business planning, about the opportunity to re-establish stations as a place, and that's certainly something as a proposition we've been working alongside Northern and colleagues about. How do we re-energise and refocus the opportunities that are created by having stations in our communities? So there are some aspects of the rail reform which we'd like to think we can actually move forward with at pace, because we have this degree of devolution in the North. In terms of the proposition, we're working through the Rail North Committee, and indeed have a subcommittee, a working group of that committee of members, to help us develop a more detailed proposition about how we would see the opportunities created by GBR of having a single guiding mind for the rail industry, providing that strategic leadership. How would we want that to work in the North? And we've got good contacts and good communications already with GBR and the transition team, and it's an opportunity for us to kind of use the conversations we have through the Rail North Committee, use our experience with the Rail North Partnership to kind of go to the next level. Because I think my observation is what we've seen most recently is the more that we can empower at a regional level, at a local level, the operators to deliver, the more we've got the opportunity to build upon the strength of the recovery that we've seen in the rail market in the North. So different kind of recovery in terms of the nature of the travel, but it's a very strong recovery. And I think there's an opportunity here for us to use what we've got as a foundation for saying to the GBR transition team, this is what it needs to look like in the North. And by the way, we would like to work with you to pilot some of these initiatives ahead of legislation coming through in Parliament in due course.
Thank you, Martin. Councillor O'Hara.
Yeah, partly a general question. Keep hearing the talk about the Central Corridor, which is Manchester, Liverpool, Hull. I'm not hearing a lot about what's being supplied for places like Blackpool, Burnley, Blackburn, Barrow, Kendal, Ulverston. And in regards with inflation, they're always the places that get their funding cut. And with this new rail plan, which I'm not confident of, but which apparently is coming in, and you talk about stations, how strong is all the outlying places going to get support if all the money is going to be ploughed into the central and the big areas. And there are plenty of small towns that are in the north that don't seem to get a mention or a thought.
Rather than go into the detail, if I kind of pick up the general point, I think what defines TFN is we know from the evidence base we need to continue to invest in growing the railway. If we're going to deliver the strategic outcomes for the north, economic growth, that's sustainable, that actually provides people with access to opportunities and services, we know from the work we've done on the regional decarbonisation strategy, we need to be planning for growth in the railway. And I think that's what we saw with the rail recovery. We saw the recovery in passengers being much stronger, much faster than elsewhere in the country. And that's why, Councillor, it's important that we continue with this opportunity to make the case in terms of revenues as well as costs, because if we've got the strength in the recovery, you've got the revenues. And therefore, if you're solely focusing on costs, which is what might be happening at a national level, there's a great risk you're actually cutting your nose to spite your face, if I might sort of use an expression. And I think that's where we need to use our experience and the partnership through the Rail North Partnership to keep that pressure on about it's delivering the services we need now, as well as being supportive and helping to deliver the investment that we've already got in the pipeline. And by the way, the TFN board is really clear that for the longer term, what we need to keep making is the case for the NPR in full. So yes, in the integrated rail plan, we saw that commitment from government, and it's welcome to investment in certain parts of the network. But we know that there are other extremities, parts of the Northern Powerhouse Rail proposal. We need to make the case, whether it's places like Leamside Line, electrification to Hull, we need other parts of it to come through. And that's where the TFN board are really clear. We do not lose focus on that longer term ambition as well. And that's where we need to get smarter when we come to future spending reviews, future planning periods for the industry. We need to use our evidence base to keep making those points moving forward.
Thank you, Martin. Are you okay with that, Councillor O'Hara?
Well, to a degree, it's just that the number of times improvements on the East Lancs and the Fyle line have happened. I mean, it's 8 years since they were going to do something on the South Fyle line, and it just keeps getting postponed. So that's why I asked the question. Thanks.
I feel your frustration. Thank you. Councillor Parish, please.
Thank you. Morning, Martin. Steve Parish from Warrington. I'm beginning to think we need a flow diagram of all these bodies, who runs what, who's under whom, who's represented, especially other than the Met counties and the big cities, and who's got the money.
I hope that what we can do with the Northern proposition is actually make that clear as how it works for the benefit of the North. So we have the Rail North Partnership, we have that arrangement with the Department for Transport for implementing the contracts at the moment. We've got the working through the Rail North Committee to actually look at how we can build upon that. We're supporting some of the opportunities in particular parts of the North. But I think the point that you're making there, Councillor Parish, is quite helpful in terms of having clarity about that, because then it will help both this committee but also the TFN board to understand where we target the points that need to be made and at what time. And that's the kind of thing comes back to, for me, part of the evolution of TFN, part of, if you like, the step into TFN Mark II is getting smarter about how we identify what needs to happen in the next 3 to 5 years as part of the journey that we're on. Some of that will be best done at a regional level. Some of that will be best done at a sub-regional or an individual authority level. But I think that's where we can work through the Rail North Committee and through the Rail North Partnership to kind of have that map.
Okay, thank you. I was serious about the flow diagram, by the way, and things like the Manchester. I called them a shadowy task force, the Manchester task force, but I've got a bit of a more explanation now. Not from you, but earlier.
But I think it's a good point, though, Councillor Parish, about having simplicity and clarity on these things actually helps all partners to understand where to push the buttons, particularly when there are lots of pressures on resources in all authorities. So actually understanding, and that's probably one of the things that we help with moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe we're now. Oh, Councillor Davison. Thank you. Please, over to you, Councillor. You're the last speaker on this. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I mean, having sat through the last X number of meetings, right up to the shelving of HS2, it's quite a significant change now. To me, it's almost like a complete reboot of Transport for the North in terms of who the partners are, what the direction is, and really what our aspirations are. I'd be interested to know really what has continued from the previous iterations of Transport for the North. I know TransPennine is still very much, the east-west link is very important to us. I haven't heard a lot of mention of looking forward to some of the later papers on rail about electrification. Although it's heartening to see that we're still banging the drum for the link of HS2 going forward, not being just lost. But I'd be interested to really know how much of the original plan has been retained and how much is completely and utterly a new direction for us.
Well, if I may, there's a number of points there. So let's just be really clear. There is no change in TfN's status as a statutory body. Our functions, our role remains unaltered. And that was very clear last year, notwithstanding the change in the way that the Northern Powerhouse Rail was being managed and overseen. Equally, the partners involved in TfN are not changed. I think in terms of that ambition for Northern Powerhouse Rail in full, I think I made it clear earlier that as far as the TfN board is concerned, then the ambition for the North remains unaltered. The package that we put out as being what we should aspire to, Northern Powerhouse Rail in full, remains where TfN aspires to get to. We have commitments through the Integrated Rail Plan, which is delivering things like electrification on the TransPennine upgrade, which is great to see, but we need to connect some of the ports and the gateways to that. So I think there are some really good foundations on which we can build. And I'm a great believer, Councillor Davison, in being able to strengthen our arguments for further investment on the basis of success in delivering what we've already got. And I think that's where our role as a co-sponsor on the Integrated Rail Plan, our role in supporting the delivery of TransPennine becomes really important. But let me be reassuring to you that things like I've talked about the reopening of the Leamside line, the electrification to Hull, the importance of looking at what is the alternative to the former HS2 Eastern leg. Those are all aspects, strategic aspects, where we need to be making and will continue to make the case for that investment. On the issue about what is the alternative to HS2 Eastern leg as it was known, we, like all the other partners, have been anxiously waiting the publication of the terms of reference for that study that was referenced in the Integrated Rail Plan. We know it's a bit of a frustration, I think, within the department that they haven't been able to get those terms of reference out sooner. But when they are published, we will need to make sure that we push on with that study as quickly as possible, that we're clear about what are the options, and that we work through the Rail North Committee and with our partners to make sure that the North's voice is heard in those discussions moving forward. So I think in terms of the big picture, the ambition remains, and the ambition isn't something that the board has dreamt up. Reminding members, the ambition that was in the Strategic Transport Plan comes from the evidence base, comes from the work we've done on the economic review, which we're updating, comes from the work we've done on decarbonisation, comes from the work we've done on social exclusion. All of that, as you'll probably touch on in the next item, is being fed into the Strategic Transport Plan, and that's why the work we're doing on the Strategic Transport Plan and the updates we're doing are so important for this year's focus of work, Chair.
Thank you very much, Martin. That's quite reassuring that the evidence base is still driving us forward, and the ambition is the same. I think that's important to note. I think the strategic thought leadership is really a very interesting development. And as this particular STB does not have connection to any one authority, like the Midlands has the West Midlands Combined Authority, or East Midlands, I can't remember which one it is. It's connected to one of them, and all the others seem to be connected to some other, directly to one combined authority. Whereas across the north of England, we don't have a North of England Combined Authority. Well, and that's not gossip, by the way. I'm not trying to set rumours going. So I think I think it's also important that you've got 2 years funding. I think that gives us some stability, which has been lacking. And the final thing I'd just like to mention to members, in North Yorkshire, we are starting our local travel plans. And I know that our officers are already tapping into Transport for the North as a resource to help with that. And I think that's a resource that I think we could all tap into. Yes, Martin.
Just on that point, Chair, as you've raised it, we know that the department is expected to publish its guidance on the local transport plans, what you're just referring to shortly. But we already know that they are saying that in terms of local transport authorities, for things like quantified carbon reduction, apologies, members, it's another 3-letter acronym that you're going to start hearing officers use, QCR. In essence, what the department is doing is pointing local transport authorities at the evidence base that we've assembled. And that's part of the conversation I was referring to earlier, Chair, about how we put together the offer so that when local transport authorities are developing their plans, they know what they can come to us for in terms of advice, guidance and support. And we can then kind of see how we can help them in that regard, because I think this evidence base is one of the best I've ever come across in terms of a sort of regional body. And it's a real asset on which we can use, if you like, to make it a little bit easier to develop some of those plans, rather than spending yet more public money to reinvent the baseline. We have the evidence base, we can share it, we can work with partners to be able to help them as they develop their more detailed plans.
That's great to know. Thank you very much, Martin. I'm going to move us on to item 5, the draft strategic transport plan, which I believe is going to be presented by Lucy Jacques. The key thing, or you can feedback on anything that Lucy actually presents. The key thing is that after the elections in May, there will be a consultation with the public, and any comments on how that might well be best done to get the best sort of, I suppose, the best collection of ideas from out there, as well as I mean, any consultation does start a behavioural change where people start to think about these things. Anyway, over to you, Lucy. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and good morning, everyone. As the Chair said, I wasn't planning to necessarily read through the paper. Hopefully we can take that as read, but there are some kind of key points that I'd like to kind of touch on. And then I'm looking for some steers, I guess, today from Scrutiny Committee, particularly around that consultation and perhaps what members would like to see as part of that process. So paragraph 2.1 of the report sets out our recommendations for Scrutiny Committee. And those are to note the proposed overarching narrative of STP2 agreed by TFN board and set out in section 4 of the report, to review the proposed key priorities and messages, which are set out in section 5 of the report, and then to note the remaining process to complete and consult on the draft STP set out in section 6. And it's this section 6, that I'd like to kind of take a bit of time to talk through in a bit more detail today, and then to kind of seek some further views on, if that's okay, Chair. Great, okay. So I guess where are we and what comes next is the key question in terms of STP. And I'm conscious that I've been to this group many a time over the last year or so, talking about, I guess, our progress in terms of developing STP2. So just before Christmas, we hit a really key milestone for us. So we issued our first draft of the plan out to our partners, to your officers, for kind of comment and feedback. And that was a really valuable process for us. We got a lot of comments and feedback back, which were really, really helpful. And all of that has helped us prepare our second draft, which we issued out to partners on the 17th of February, and they've got until close of play, sort of today, tomorrow, to come back to us with further thoughts on that draft. But what's really important is that draft reflects that extensive feedback we got from your officers from that first round, and it's helped kind of us move the plan forward, really. We did make it clear in terms of the second draft, in terms of content, we believe the substance of the plan is now complete. But we recognise that, and we highlight this to your officers, you know, we needed to do a bit of further work to further refine and reduce the length of the document, remove a bit of the exposition, and sharpen the narrative ahead of what will be our version 3, which is what we will issue with the TFN board papers when they go out on the 15th of March. So we've been doing a little bit of that refinement behind the scenes, and we'll continue that over the next week or so ahead of those board papers being issued. The partnership board have also provided feedback on that second draft to us, and we had a really constructive conversation with them last week around that. They seemed really supportive of the content of the plan, and particularly the emphasis of the plan on the economic, social and environmental outcomes, which kind of a key theme throughout the document, really. So some really strong kind of messages of support for what we've done so far, and some really helpful steers of what else we need to consider as we further refine it ahead of the board version. As I say, we'll continue to work on that over the next week or so. So would welcome comments today from Scrutiny Committee, if there are any, on what you've seen in terms of the paper. But as I say, I think we're now looking towards thinking about the consultation and what our process for that is. So as STP is our statutory document, we have to have a 12-week statutory consultation as part of the process. And our current plan is post TFN board in March. Hopefully they'll agree the draft plan is suitable to go out for consultation. That consultation would begin post-PERDA, so after the local elections, so running likely from the middle of May through to August time. Ahead of the consultation, we will also publish the draft independent sustainability appraisal, which sits alongside our STP and essentially helps ensure that we have followed all due process in terms of the environmental considerations, equalities, impact assessment, etc. of the plan. We'll also publish some of the supporting evidence that sits alongside STP, including the refresh of the Northern Powerhouse Independent Economic Review. So a really key part of the evidence base there. Following our 12-week consultation process, our plan is then to take back a summary of, I guess, the feedback we've received at September board before we take a final version of the plan back through TFN board in December this year to seek adoption. So that's kind of the high level timeline. I did want to just take a moment, if I may, just to give a bit more of a flavour of what we're thinking the consultation might entail. And I'd like to seek some views from Scrutiny Committee, particularly around this, to help shape our thinking over the next few weeks. So in terms of the consultation, we think we're going to do a mixed methods approach this time around, and that's learning from what we did for STP1, but also what we've done subsequently on the freight strategy, the decarbonisation strategy, and the social inclusion strategy, or the connected community strategy as it's now called. So we've done some further consultation since STP1, and there's, you know, we're trying to cherry pick the lessons learned from that and what we think worked well and what didn't. So all of that's kind of informing our initial thinking in terms of the STP consultation. So initially what we're thinking is we'll have a live online virtual consultation room, so very much in the same vein as what we did on the freight strategy. We know from speaking with partners and the public, they found that really useful. So that'll be live for the full 12 weeks. It will contain all the kind of key information, but also was quite interactive and engaging. So
Thank you. I haven't got any hands up at the moment, but I've got a couple of thoughts for you. So I'll just give you my thoughts and then I will hand over to Councillor Salter. And we're getting votes now. We're getting people coming in now. One of the things that we're quite active at North Yorkshire is our libraries, and I wonder whether, you know, some sort of liaison which says people can go to our libraries and access this particular this particular. I think you said the live online consultation room. So that would be one thing. The other thing that occurred to me was at our council, we do members' seminars once every month, and maybe you can, maybe you could find a way to get a guest starring role at some of those. I'm sure they're not all on the same Wednesday of the week and month, but so you might be able to get something out there that's helpful. But anyway, look, there's lots more people ready to come in here. So just give me a second, because I just need to work out the chain of the speed of which the hands threw up. So, Councillor Salter, please, your hand, you were first off the blocks, as they say.
Thank you, Chairman. I think very straightforwardly, 2 things to say. One is I really welcome and would encourage having some face-to-face sessions with councillors. For instance, if you were to have a session in County Hall, where I am, you could invite councillors from a number of councils who are in the area. I do think that sort of session can be immensely valuable, both for making sure that councillors are sort of clued up and able to cascade information out, as well as getting that broad perspective. So I really want to just encourage that as something really important. The other comment would be that in terms of making consultation available to the public and as accessible as possible, I think having mechanisms through social media and making the process of filling out consultation responses as easy as possible. It's probably a very straightforward comment, and maybe something that will have already been completely taken into account. But I really want to hammer home Twitter, Facebook. It's things like that, and just the ability to click straight through and put the comments rather than, making the process too demanding, and then people will sort of give up halfway through. So social media, going to as many people as possible, I think, is the way forward.
Thank you, Matthew. I'll now go to Councillor Parish, please.
Thank you. It was just a caution, really. Obviously, when you want local people to get involved, but there's always a risk that, you set up expectations and a wish list. I mean, even just between the two Cheshire authorities and Warrington, some of the early things a few years ago, you could say, well, there is something for everybody there, but, I think the Americans call it log rolling, don't they, where you say, I'll support that if you'll support that. And, some of the things, they're not going to fly, but, a new line from Moberly into Manchester Airport from the west. So I just wonder how you address that and don't set up expectations, and how you keep a bit of realism about what schemes might be possible to go into the strategic plan.
Thank you very much. Councillor Furley, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just checking you can hear me first.
We can hear you.
Brilliant, thank you. So when it comes to consultation, I think there's definitely something to be said for contacting our comms team and department in Hull, simply because ourselves, we carried out one of the largest transport surveys ourselves in the city, getting quite a lot of feedback, and I think it's something that we could feed into. And then we've got a number of panels, such as a people's panel, which would be quite useful to maybe have a delegation to, or a report or something can go there. And then for myself, I run a scrutiny, so I'd be happy to invite members from TFN if that's something they'd be interested in. Obviously, we can work on that as it is. And then as for just some small parts of the report, and I'll make it very quick. 5.4 item F, I think part of the investment in improving local connectivity is definitely seeing how people would benefit from maybe having their branch lines looked at, because massively, if we want carbon reduction, branch lines are a great way to do that. And some communities would obviously instantly be connected and remove cars off the road. And then there's already been some talk from members, not necessarily from Hull, but I thank them for banging the drum for us anyway about the Hull to Selby electrification line. As a member from Hull, it would be poor of me not to continue to bang that drum and say it's something we definitely support and would like to see. I thank Councillor O'Hara for mentioning it, even if it doesn't see it in his own interest for residents around his area, but I would support rail linkage in his area also. Thank you for that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Foley. I think that was an example of log rolling, but what I would say is, so thank you for that. So Katie and Lucy, Councillor Davison wants to come in, but just before he does, so Councillor Salter is saying he'd like to see clued up councillors so we can cascade your message out. Also a frictionless process, and you've got some volunteers of help here. So just before I ask you, Lucy or Katie or both of you for questions, I know it's only day 17, Katie, but we'd like to get you in at the deep end. Councillor Davison, your comments, please.
Well, just following up really on some of the comments about how we get the message out, or how you get the message out to the public. And we run many consultations online. The response is usually disappointing, I have to say, and it's a challenge to try and get as many people as possible to engage online, certainly when it's a very big questionnaire as well. They don't stop halfway through and throw the towel in. So the challenge in terms of the size and the complexity of the online thing, from experience, certainly in North Links, it's, you wonder whether you're getting really a representative feedback from the population. You'll always get the people that have got an axe to grind or are heavily involved, but you really want to get out there to Joe Soap, the people who are going about the daily business. That's a challenge. I think a few mechanisms that we've talked about, certainly engaging with councillors, the various committees. They're always the front line. We're always the front line with regards to people's complaints about transport, whether they be trains or buses or anything else. TransPennine being one that I get regularly thrown down my throat. Shocking. Many councils have publications that are put out. North Links has a newsletter that goes out both in paper form through every letterbox and digitally. Worth approaching our comms team here in North Links, and I'm sure the same in other councils, to get a chunk of script in there about this consultation. Town and parish councils are often overlooked. I'm a chair of a town council, and it's a good mechanism to get right down at local grassroots level. So just a few suggestions really to try and get as wide a participation as possible. But other than that, I think the context is good, and as has been said before, let's not raise aspirations. We can't have fantastic new rail lines everywhere. I think people might realise that the country's a bit skint at the moment. Probably for the next 10 years, there's not going to be an awful lot of money to invest in any great infrastructure projects. But so I think keeping it sensible is key. And one thing I'll always bang about, HS2 for us really, for any serious movement of freight from road to rail without HS2, forget it. There just simply isn't the capacity within the existing lines to put more freight passed down alongside call them high speed, middle speed, by world standards passenger trains. We've got to keep banging the drum on HS2 if we've got any serious hopes of getting more freight away from the roads. And that will solve a lot of your problems on the road strategy as well.
Thanks very much, John. I'm glad to see you're on form. That was great. I think one area we might also add for you, Lucy, is local business, whatever they want to call themselves. Every town has some form of business group, and they'll probably just tell you they want lots of cars and free parking in towns, but they will give you feedback, and you will get that balance of feedback, which I think John was hinting there that, you know, if it's very much a friction-filled process to actually be on the consultation, it's really the people that persevere that get their message heard, and that's not necessarily getting you a balance. So I don't know, is that enough for you, Lucy? Has that given you something to start with?
Yeah, absolutely. Really helpful discussion there, and lots of food for thought for Katie and I to consider over the next few weeks. So really invaluable. I think the point about managing expectations, I think, is a really valid one. And again, I think as we kind of finalise the consultation materials, that's our mechanism to make sure they're right, and we keep it focused in the right way to make sure the responses are helpful for us and are also within, what's feasible within our kind of sphere of influence, I guess. So yeah, we'll continue to work that out, but really helpful discussion. Thank you all.
So I think the message is all our councils, we believe, will help you. So I'm now wishing to move. I'm wishing to move to item 6, which is the road investment strategy, which I believe Owen Wilson is going to present for us. And the important thing to note here is it's about the approach to developing the recommendation for investment in strategic roads. One of the key things to note here is that the next road strategy session is 25 through to 2030. Anyway, I'll hand you over to Owen. Thank you very much, Owen.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, you're absolutely right. The next RIS period, road investment strategy period, is 2025 to 2030. Though actually, we've got our sights beyond that period as well in terms of developing a pipeline. So that I'll take the report as having been read, and I do have some slides to run through quickly in a few minutes to highlight some key. First of all, the committee are asked to comment on our approach to developing the recommendations, as you said, Chair. And in terms of the report, we set out some key messages we envisage that we will present to the Department for Transport and National Highways in terms of thinking around the road investment strategy. So it's not just about schemes, it's how you take this forward collaboratively with TfN and with local authorities. That is absolutely critical to delivering a more integrated approach. And then the report does set out or summarises the methodology that TfN's used to look at if you like, hotspots on the strategic road network, where there are challenges and issues, and where our evidence suggests that some form of intervention is required. It's very easy and it's natural to jump to solutions in terms of a new road scheme, and in some, many instances that is what will be required. But I think we need, to step back and look at all options for investment, and that goes beyond just investment in the strategic road network. I think it's important just to remind everyone the focus of this work is on the strategic road network, which is just 2% of roads in the north, or roughly 2%. So it's not about local roads or potholes on local roads, just to make that clear. I know that's clearly that is an issue for all members. You will all be very much aware of the key challenges we face around the need to rapidly decarbonise transport, the substantial maintenance, renewal and resilience issues on all roads, but including the strategic road network, which obviously requires a lot of funding to improve things. The fiscal constraints that have already been touched on this morning, which we know about, and we know that there are some cost overruns in the current RIS programme, the RIS2 programme. So that's all putting pressure on the amount of funding that will be available 2025 to 2030 and indeed beyond. So that's all got to be part of our thinking in terms of pulling together a kind of realistic recommendation proposition to government and to National Highways. But having said that, I think we still have our, the clear focus is on TfN's ambitions around economic performance, and social inclusion, improving health, and the decarbonisation I mentioned earlier. So I think finally, before I go on to the slides, I think the final key points to make are that we're saying that the approach needs to be more holistic in future, collaborative, integrated, and place-based. So, one solution might work for Greater Manchester, it won't work for West Cumbria or East Riding of Yorkshire. So it needs to be more focused on working with local partners to understand the issues in those areas. For example, the more remote rural areas in the north tend to be more reliant on the road network and have poorer connectivity in terms of reliability of journeys, particularly where it's single carriageway routes, and resilience issues in some cases due to weather events. More urban areas tend to have higher levels of congestion, which is a challenge, and you may need new road capacity to deal with that, but there's also more scope for other measures such as improved public transport. So the two need to be developed together in collaboration. So I'll just share my screen if that's okay with you, Chair, and just quickly run through some of the methodology we've used and the approach we're taking with National Highways on this. So hopefully that has come through. Can I just check that screen's being shared?
It has, Owen. Thank you very much.
Good. So we have been at TfN working with National Highways to influence their thinking on the next RIS programme, and they have a kind of process they follow. They're developing something called the SRN initial report and route strategies, and your officers have also had an opportunity to feed in through workshops that took place with National Highways last year. Unfortunately, there have been delays in publication of reports. Sitting with ministers is our understanding, waiting for final sign-off and publication. The latest I'd heard is, potentially late February. Well, that's past early March for publication. If it slips much beyond that, we might be held up by PERDA, and it would be May. Those documents set out the sort of key challenges on the network. They don't go into detail in terms of solutions. That comes later. So National Highways programme is currently working towards the end of this year to put a submission to government in terms of what they recommend as the interventions that need to go forward in the next RIS period. So it's critical that we work with them over the coming months to shape and influence those recommendations. And I'm sure members will be aware there are schemes in a RIS pipeline, some of them in your areas that are being developed, such as the A64 in North Yorkshire. There's A1 in South Yorkshire, schemes on the west of the Pennines as well, being brought forward and considered. So we've been engaging with your officers throughout this work and are actually going through some further consultation on a one-to-one basis with officers over the next few weeks. So I'll just skip on. And this slide is just for your information, really. This is a National Highways graphic, but it's kind of the very high level timetable for the RIS development. So the next thing, as I mentioned, we're expecting is the Strategic Road Network initial report sometime soon, working towards the final publication of their business plan in 24-25, and that would then take forward delivery of the RIS programme. So just a very quick recap, because the work we're doing at the current time, we haven't started from scratch. We're building on the work TfN did with the strategic corridor were published 2 or 3 years ago now, and they identified investment in road and rail schemes across the north, an ambitious programme, I think someone mentioned earlier, out to 2050. But that is the evidence base we've used to identify the parts of the strategic road network we need to look at for potential RIS 3, potential RIS 4 interventions. And that the information on those is on our website if anyone is interested. We then did some further work and reported to TfN's board in 2020. I'm sure I recall coming to this committee as well back then, sequencing that investment programme to look at what was needed and what was realistically deliverable in over 3 time periods, sort of up to 2027. So that's really schemes that are already happening, and then up to the mid-2030s. So our focus has been on that sort of short to medium term in terms of a pipeline or a potential pipeline for the strategic road network investment. Now, in terms of how we've approached this, again, working with your officers, but we've reviewed the lists of potential interventions that we identified previously with your officers, and then we've developed a kind of series of metrics or levels of service indicators which we've used to assess the performance, the need for intervention, and the impact of the network on communities where they run through, where that part of the SRN operates. And in kind of summary terms, that covers 3 broad areas, what we've termed sort of the network drivers. So why do you need good roads in that part of the north? So that's about connectivity to jobs, employment, to, national parks, etc., supporting economic growth and performance. So we've got a comprehensive database of jobs and housing growth where it's planned across the north that we've used to help with that indicator, and also looking at freight flows on the strategic road network. And absolutely take the point, we need to get more freight on rail, but still 90-odd% of freight moves on the road network. 2/3 of freight miles are on the strategic road network. It will always be important for freight. Then looked at performance in terms of journey time, reliability, levels of congestion, safety. I think safety is a critical indicator, and there are some, particularly the more rural parts of the SRN, where safety needs to improve. And then the impact of the network in terms of noise, air quality, and also a high-level view of sort of transport-related social exclusion and opportunities for active travel. The next couple of slides go into a little bit more detail. I'll not dwell on that today, but happy to take any questions in terms of the methodologies used. We've shared this with your officers as we've developed this process. I can see a hand up. Is it okay if I leave it till the end and take a question at the end? Chair.
Owen, I'll keep a list of the questioners. Don't worry, you just crack on and complete your work. Thanks.
Okay, and then we also have a kind of another layer of information that we can use, and that's looking at the deliverability and affordability, and actually the political level of support for schemes across the North. And that's based on work we did back in 2020, which was refreshed through discussions with your officers and cost estimates that we had completed at that time. Undoubtedly, cost inflation will have had an impact, but it still gives a view as to the relative cost of some of these potential interventions. And then just to kind of summarise, come to an end on the slides, we've looked at the relative performance across the network. We've actually looked at 2018 or 2019 baseline and then the mid-2030s, so 2033, using two scenarios, one with a more constrained traffic growth, which is something TfN calls urban zero carbon, which is a scenario, again, we developed with your officers and published a report about 18 months ago on that. And then something that's called National Trip End Model, which is the Department for Transport's growth scenario for traffic on the strategic road network. So in simple terms, there's a lower and a higher level of traffic growth in those two scenarios. And that's to give us a view as to whether, even if in the lower traffic growth scenario, there are really still performance issues on the network. And then looked at the interventions and done an initial kind of assessment in terms of the relative need for an intervention over the next RIS period and RIS 4 as well. So where there are more substantial performance issues or a need for intervention across those three areas, the network drivers, the performance and the impact, we've assessed those as being ranked as sort of needing more in need of an intervention than areas with kind of less issues apparent. It's fair to say that all these schemes were identified through a previous SIFT when we did the strategic development corridor work. So, not surprisingly, they all show some performance issues or some requirement for investment, but it's a relative kind of level of investment of need we've looked at. And then this is just to finalise, as I've said, the majority of locations show some need for intervention, and journey time, reliability, performance issues on those parts of the network. Whether that's down to congestion or delays caused by slow-moving traffic. We've got a good data set now we can use to look at that performance level down to sort of hourly. It looks down to an hour on a specific date or averaged over a year, for example. So I'll skip that slide, which is on the need for intervention, because I've talked about the kind of affordability and deliverability. But where we're at now, we're planning to take the report to the board, to update the board on this work. We're waiting for the SRN initial report to be published, so we will need to reflect on that, and there will be an opportunity to respond to that report. So there'll be a period of public consultation, which is expected to be 8 weeks. It's public consultation, so you can all respond as well as local authorities. TfN, depending on when that is published, will take it through one of our governance boards, executive board or the board, if the timing works for that. And we're going through a period of ongoing engagement with officers to discuss our findings, and we will need to work with National Highways in the coming months to kind of continue to influence what feeds into the RIS recommendations at the end of the year. So I'll stop for questions there.
So Owen, are you equipped with pen and pencil or pencil and paper, or because I have four questioners for you, so I was thinking we might get all the questions or all these first four sets of questions in and then let you respond. Are you comfortable with that?
I am, yes.
Okay, well, in which case, Councillor Cooper, you were first on the draw.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks, Owen. I wanted to ask you about the network drivers in particular. If you just indulge me for a second, it could be argued that the investment in London, for example, is quite easy to justify because you have quite an established economy. You have a congested transport network. You can always make a strong economic growth case for investment in London. You can also look at socio-economic factors. You can look at deprivation in London, which is quite high, which isn't necessarily fixed by a transport scheme, but nonetheless, you can always include that in your model, can't you, and make a good case for it. And I think, I guess for me, one of the points of having Transport for the North is to level up, to use the terminology, is to be able to draw investment into transport investment into the north, and to encourage economic growth here. And what I really want to ask you is, do you feel that your network drivers, the 4 criteria that you list in the appendix, do you feel that they're robust enough to avoid kind of repeating that London problem, but with Manchester or Leeds or something? So we might choose to make a priority of investing in towns, for example. We might think that our market towns, our former industrial towns, they need transport investment because we see their future potential. We want to push investment into them rather than focus all of our investment into cities, and perhaps going after the easier economic growth rather than looking at sort of the long-term rebalancing of the economy across towns in the north of England. Do you think that the network drivers that you've got there would do that? I can see how they might do in terms of the connectivity one in particular, but I'm just wondering what your perspective is on that. Is that okay?
That's fine. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So now can I ask Councillor Salter to put his question to you, Owen, so you've got a whole set?
Thank you, Chairman. I must confess I have 3 or 4 points I was hoping to make, but I'll rattle through them as quickly as I can. The first one is that I felt in terms of the written report, it comes across as a little bit anti-car. I don't think that's really what's intended or the right approach. I think quite rightly we've always had decarbonisation as a key focus of Transport for the North, but clearly part of that has got to be electric vehicles and hydrogen, so decarbonising vehicles rather than necessarily reducing the number of cars on the road. And for instance, I mean, at point 3.13, there's reference to seeking to reduce the need for car-based travel. We could talk about seeking to facilitate alternatives to car-based travel, just as a kind of philosophical point. I wanted to say point 3.15, which is also on page 31, fulsomely agree. Next point I wanted to make is further down on page 35 on Appendix 1 for HGV routing and HGV flows. It talks about identifying high levels of traffic on roads that are not expected to support it. I'm interested, how is that defined? Is that about A, B roads? Is that about carriageway width, the surrounding road network capacity, presence of bridges with width or weight limits, that sort of thing? I'm interested in a little detail. And finally, I just thought I would flag up as a point that I think an example of where you can have road investment and infrastructure that has really, I think, done a good job at achieving some of the sorts of goals that we want to do from the fairly recent past is the Morecambe Link Road from the M6, which was about 7-8 years ago now. I can't quite remember off the top of my mind. Before that went in, Lancaster city centre was often highlighted as an area with real problems with air pollution. After that's happened, that's much improved, and there will be effects in terms of health inequalities, whatever. I just wanted to flag that up as, you know, something as a good example of the sorts of things that can be achieved.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Councillor Jones.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I wanted to ask a question about the Northwest Quadrant project, and I don't know whether Owen can answer me now, or whether he could send me an email sometime. But highways, national highways, have been talking about this project for the last 3 or 4 years. And every time I go to any meeting about strategic road or motorway network, I'm always asking, where is this study up to? Because as far as I know, they're trying to alleviate congestion on the M60 junctions 8 to 18. And yet the study seems to go on forever, and I'm still waiting to see where we're up to. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Owen. We've just got one late entry, so if you can just keep writing for a moment, and it will. I'm sure Councillor Davison will give you a couple of. It'll be a couple of pages of foolscap. So be ready.
No, not at all. Not at all. Well, I just wanted to touch on obviously the big strand is decarbonisation, and I'll extend that out to be basically atmospheric pollution in general, because we've all seen now, and I can't see any mention particularly of the new focus that's on pollution from tyre wear, which apparently is even higher in electric vehicles due to the weight of them. Also brake dust, and that's, I think, going to be part of what Europe are going to be calling Euro 7. So whilst we're not in the European Union, we won't escape Euro 7 because we want to sell things to them. And no doubt any vehicle we make here will have to conform to Euro 7 if they finally pass the legislation. But it's a serious issue. And agreeing here, it is obviously anti-car is the thing, and we would all have a fantastic public transport network that would enable people to abandon the cars, but that's way away in the future, I think, unfortunately. The other thing I'm concerned about, of course, is that, again, hydrogen is floating about as an alternative to electrics, but the current cost of electricity charging outside of the home is now causing people to turn to hybrids that aren't fully electric. And the other thing that concerns me, of course, is that having had the pleasure of a recent journey in an electric vehicle of some distance, not just around town, the time to charge, the availability of chargers currently is abysmal. There actually was a TV programme I watched where they went to one service area and they were all full with a queue waiting. So they had enough charge to go on to the next service area where, yes, there was still a wait, but it wasn't as bad. And they observed that there was it's going to be much better in the future because they're building a row of new charging stations. Now, if you looked at the amount of electric vehicles on the road at the moment, and imagine if everybody took them up, I think there'd be a queue down the M6 waiting for a charging point on a motorway services. So I just wonder whether our current policies really reflect reality rather than some sort of misty-eyed utopia. That's a real question. But in terms of the network, we all know where roads need to be built. We all know where the hotspots are, and we'd all support it. I think the observation that more roads means more cars is also valid, though. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, John. Right. Owen, over to you. You've got 10 minutes maximum to answer all those questions. Otherwise, because David's anxious to is anxious to tell us about Northern Powerhouse Rail.
Thank you, Chair, and I will take them in order. So starting with Councillor Cooper, his question around the network drivers. I think before going into any detail, it's important to say this isn't mechanistic. It's a guide to where the priorities sit. We still need to have that conversation with all your officers and agree, regionally where priorities lie, and certainly. TfN does not want to be in a position where we're promoting a scheme that you don't strongly support within your area, and neither does National Highways want to be in that position. So that is a key thing to take on board. In terms of the actual metrics, Councillor Cooper, you're right in terms of the connectivity metric, if you like. That's a counterbalance to something like looking at the traffic flow. The more rural areas tend to have poorer connectivity, whether that's to jobs or health, etc. And that is one of the reasons we've used that metric to give us that view as to where connectivity is more challenging, and particularly where there are no other alternatives or good alternatives in terms of rail. One thing I didn't say, of course, is buses run on roads, so we need to make sure that roads operate efficiently and effectively for buses, and TfN's taking some work forward to support partners with bus service improvement plans, and I think the message needs to go in terms of SRN investment, where improvements can be made that support buses. That's also something we should promote. So I think, to put it to summarise, we're very much aware of the challenge of looking at parts of the network across the whole of the north, and as I said at the outset, it needs to be a place-based approach, not entirely based on metrics that you apply across the whole of the north in the same way. Councillor Salt's comments, interesting, and thank you for that. The danger of being seen as anti-car. It is a really challenging kind of tightrope to walk in terms of the messaging. I think it is important that the North does make the case for investment in road. We don't all the money going elsewhere in the country, so we need to get our messaging right. But I think also we do need to balance that with the message that it's not just about predict and provide. We need an approach that is based on our strategy, the outcomes we want to achieve, and if we are, for example, if we are looking to invest in new road infrastructure, how does that support economic performance and growth, and how do we avoid inducing traffic that you would really want to be on public transport, or people to be able to access services very locally rather than having to drive long distances. Councillor Salter, you mentioned I think both you and Councillor Davison mentioned electric vehicles. Absolutely need to be part of the solution, which is why TfN has been doing a significant amount of work with your partners, with your officers on electric vehicle charging infrastructure, have published an evidence base, and are continuing to work with government, Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, to promote more effort in that regard, because we're lagging behind in terms of the provision of electric vehicle charging, both in the north but nationally. And the point around the link to Morecambe, good one. My son's at Lancaster University, so I know what the traffic's like in Lancaster, and I've seen that new road. So yeah, that's a good point made. Manchester North West Quadrant, it's been maybe 5 years, that study in progress. I can't say a huge amount, though I did have a call with colleagues from Transport for Greater Manchester with National Highways last week. They are still looking at a series of potential interventions in Manchester North West Quadrant, and you're right, it was originally Junction 8 to Junction 18 of the M60. What may happen is that National Highways put forward some interventions for the next RIS period or RIS 4. It won't, I don't think I'll be giving anything away to say it's not going to be like the huge scheme it was originally envisaged as, which was effectively a new part of the strategic road network, a new motorway, a new outer ring road. Councillor Davison's points around pollution, again, this points to the need for kind of place-based options, looking at particularly the urban areas where you have higher rates of nitrous oxides and particulates. How can we work collaboratively? And this is where it's not just National Highways; it has to be in partnership with the local transport authorities. How do you work to reduce demand on the network, or introduce measures that might be around speed constraint, for example, at certain times of the day, or clean air zones to manage atmospheric pollution. And Martin mentioned the LTP guidance. I think one of the messages we've put forward is that National Highways needs to be working with local authorities to support delivery of LTPs and particularly the quantified carbon reduction, and it is related. It's different, but it's related to things like nitrous oxide and particulates as well, which all come from traffic. I think that's covered it, Chair.
Thank you very much, Owen. That was very good. That was just over 6.5 minutes. Not that I was timing you. I have one question left for you, which is Councillor Salter. So if you would like to just come back in, Matthew, that would be helpful.
Thank you, Chairman. It was just very briefly, I was still interested in the HGV routing in terms of how we decided which roads were not able to support them. Oh, and I was going to mention, with the electric cars, don't forget hydrogen as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I did miss that. Apologies for that. So, I mean, this works looking across the whole of the north. So we haven't gone down to the levels of detail where you're looking at bridge clearances, etc. That's clearly very much more detailed than we can do across the whole of the north. But what we've looked at is HGV flows and the capacity of the road, so that the type of road. This is strategic road network, but you have everything ranging from 4-lane motorway down to single carriageway routes. So it's kind of that level of analysis, Councillor. And on hydrogen, yes, absolutely. Potentially part of the mix, particularly for HGVs. So my colleague Peter Cole, who led on the decarbonisation strategies, is doing some work looking at potential for hydrogen, or where we might need hydrogen refuelling for both rail and highway.
Thank you, Owen. So just before we move on, I think the watchword I think came out was, how do we so just for you, Owen, is really a little bit around the messaging, which you're treading that line. The other thing I'd like to add, just picking up on Councillor Davison's point, is about just under 2,000 people a year die on our roads in terms of physical accidents, but about 10,000 people a year die from emissions that are attributed to our roads. So I do think that we need to keep a perspective on this. But it's very much our geography, particularly in North Yorkshire, is very much that I believe some form of vehicle moving from A to B is likely to be part of our solution for a long time. Only 3% of North Yorkshire residents have access to the train. And that isn't going to change significantly very quickly. So we have to look at this in different places. And I am sure that that's the same in other parts of the world, like rural Lincolnshire or Lancashire, etc. So look, thank you very much, Owen. I'd now like to move to item 7, which is David Hogarth. Over to you, David. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, and hopefully I can save you a little bit of time on this, because we did touch on it in the earlier part of the meeting around the co-sponsorship role on Northern Powerhouse Rail, which is the focus of this particular report. So the report is not dealing with the merits of delivering NPR in full, which is still, as Martin said earlier, our policy position and as agreed by the board. But on the IRP version of the network, which should point out that in the IRP, DfT are referring to as an adaptive investment process and a pipeline of investment. So it's, in other words, the first phase of what we ultimately want to see and need across the north. We've been offered a co-sponsorship arrangement because you recall that the actual clienting of the project now sits with DfT. Some of the staff transferred from TfN last year to the Department for Transport. But we've been given this co-sponsorship role, and this is an opportunity for us to shape the IRP version of the Northern Powerhouse Rail network and make sure that it delivers the best outcomes that we can get for the north, and it remains a strong building block for that fuller network that we want to see. I think specifically the roles for us are about representing the interests of TfN members, yourselves, and providing advice on the interfaces between NPR and the local networks, rail and maybe to some extent road or integrated transport as well. So the focus of this is very much on the new lines and the NPR upgrades, but it does give us some input as well on what are called dependencies in the document, which include HS2 West, Trans-Pennine route upgrade, the electrification of that route, and East Coast mainline upgrade as well. So what this paper is doing is presenting the agreement that underpins this co-sponsorship arrangement to the board. That'll go to the next board meeting. We've actually been working within the spirit of the agreement for most of this year. We've been building a team internally to take on the new role, and they sit within the strategic rail team. So this agreement has been through DFT. We're bringing it here before the board. I think probably in terms of the focus, I would suggest it's probably less on the detail of the words and more about what we want to do with this new arrangement. And I think particularly around how we can help your officers engage better with the NPR project and the dependent projects. So I'm happy to take any comments or views from members at this stage, Chair.
Thank you very much, David. I will ask for questions and comments on this particular document and on how we're going to use this in future to make sure that our voice is heard. So are there any questions for David, or is it so it's just so straightforward that we don't need to ask? Councillor Davison.
Well, no, I mean, it's a good paper. I think it's nice to see that we're still banging the drum for our bit of HS2. I think I've said before, I think it's been a real shame. It's been badly sold. Calling it high speed in the first place has led much of the public to think it was all about getting from London to Edinburgh at 400 miles an hour, you know, which it never was. It was always about capacity. And as I think I've said previously today, without that, a lot of what we want to do in terms of getting stuff off the roads, getting freight onto roads, getting that connectivity for passengers, we've got to have something like an HS2. I don't think there are any paths left. I think all the nighttime paths are used up on the existing East Coast. Spreading a 50 mile an hour freight train amongst what we call high speed, whether it's 140 mile an hour, whatever they can do now, we're at capacity basically. So I think the key thing for me is that we've got to keep banging the drum. I don't know whether it's completely and utterly dead, HS2. I'd like to know what the view is really on whether that is a vain hope or whether we're going to get somewhere by keep promoting it. But to me, looking at all our previous plans for rail, we're very heavily around that leg being delivered. Obviously, we've had to change tack, but, you know, we shouldn't give up. So just really, is it dead or are we still hopeful? That's the real question, I think. Thanks.
Thank you, John. I think we all share your frustration that it really was sold on the wrong thing. It's about capacity. Anyway, over to you, David.
Yeah, a couple of points, maybe just in response. I think in terms of the Eastern Leg, it's all about the Leeds area study that is part of this co-sponsorship work, and so we're waiting to see that brief come out, as Martin mentioned, and that's absolutely key. But clearly, you know, the previous Eastern Leg HS2 proposal is one of the ways of connecting Leeds into the network. So, you know, we'll certainly be pushing that as part of the work, looking at all sorts of options. So really, essentially, getting that work underway is you know, really important. We intend to make strong inputs to that and use our evidence base, as has been talked about earlier on, the tools we have through the TAME team, for example, to get the best possible outcomes there. But you're right in terms of the impacts on the wider network as well, Councillor, in that you know, there's almost two aspects to this co-sponsorship. One is the kind of very local detail about how these routes and upgrades work in local areas, but there's also how does the network work, and this will affect all areas, not just those directly on the NPR new lines or upgraded lines, because how you actually thread those new services through, and the freight services as well that we want to support, will determine the future pattern of services. So, you know, it's really important that we continue in making the case and working with you for the things that you want to see.
So thank you. That's a valuable observation, Councillor Davison, and thank you for your response. I see no more questions. So if there are no more questions, then I will move to close the meeting. Are there any more questions before I move on? I can't see any. Well, I'd like to thank you all for attending today. I'd like to say that the next meeting is on the 1st of June. It will be a face-to-face meeting, and I believe it's our AGM in terms of the rescheduling. So it'll be about 3, maybe 4 weeks after the next elections. So, as I said, thank you very much for attending, and I wish you all a great day. Goodbye now.
Thanks
Bye,
all.
Paul.
Bye.
Cheers, Paul.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.